Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to today's Foundations Live. Sorry we're a few minutes late. It's Tuesday afternoon and we're ready to go with the Bath Out special. So I say afternoon, everybody. Welcome to today's Foundations Live. Really pleased to be joined by Philip Whitehead, Andrew McCarthy and Joe Gray, who are the brains behind the Bath Out 2 project, who are going to be revealing their results with us this afternoon. So we'll move on to that presentation in just a couple of minutes. I'll just do a couple of intros and then we'll get into all that good stuff.
Foundations Live!
So just before we get going, I just wanted to flag a few things that are coming up that you may be interested in. The DFG Champions Roadshows return at the end of this month. We'll be traveling around the country again, which is always good fun. We'll be going to Newcastle on the 26th, Manchester on the 5th of March, Nottingham on the 13th of March, Plymouth on the 19th of March, and then we've got two events in London, same, but on over 2 days on the 9th and 10th of April. Most of the tickets have already gone, but I think there are a few left for Plymouth and one of the London dates. But we also have a waiting list, so if anybody drops out between now and then, we'll try and free up as many tickets as we can. And we've got all the usual content of the roadshows, if you've been to them before. So we've got the quiz, we've got packed out number of exhibitors, including some new exhibitors and some new sponsors this year. And we've got lots of content. So we've got kind of the main focus of the roadshows this time is around if your budget's, again, a little bit tight, how you might go about managing your DFG budget a little bit differently. So looking at kind of prioritization, triaging at the start of the process, how you might use your housing assistance policy and your discretion a little bit differently, and then some of the bits and pieces that you can employ as you go through the process to make the most of the budget that you have. We'll also have updates on the Building Safety Act, which is applies for any project where building control applies or building regulations applies, and particularly for high-rise buildings. So we'll be giving some updates on that, as well as all the usual bits and pieces, including new songs and the quiz. So love to see you, particularly in Plymouth and London, where we've got a few tickets left. Right, I've got there's another little bit right at the end where we've been working with, or starting to work with, Bath University, who are doing a documentary around home adaptations. I'll show a little clip towards the end of the Foundations Live this afternoon. But as I said, today is all about Bath Out 2. So I will welcome back the Bath Out 2 team.
Foundations Live!
And I suppose we went through this almost 2 weeks ago. We all went down to the House of Lords, had a nice afternoon tea, including some very dainty little cucumber sandwiches and some massive scones with lots of jam and cream. None of that this afternoon, but I'm very pleased to be joined by Philip, Andrew and Joe, who are going to go through the findings of the Bath Out 2 project, which has been kind of a 10-year labour of love, and I think probably the first and only randomised controlled trial of home adaptations, which is kind of the gold standard, isn't it, in terms of research. And I think you will be really impressed and find these findings really useful. So I will hand over, I think Philip, for you going first. Right, yep. I will pop up your slides and over to you.
So thanks, Paul. Hi, everyone, and thanks to Foundations for hosting us this afternoon. So if you did miss the House of Lords, we're going to give you the same presentation here, so you'll get to hear the findings. As Paul said, it's been a 10-year project. So we first had the idea for Bath Out 1 back in 2015. So spare a thought for my other half, who says that for the last 10 years, bathing adaptations in the homes of older adults is all I have talked about. But we have now come to the end. We do now have the findings, and I'm really pleased to be able to share them all with you today. So you'll see the logos at the top. I was based at Newcastle University. They were the lead for the study. I'm now based at York. My colleagues, Joanne and Andrew, are based at Northumbria University. We also worked with Nottingham University, Nottingham City Council and Foundations as partners in the research, alongside a number of other local authority sites who took part in the research. So just emphasising, these are the preliminary findings from the trial and the economic evaluation. We don't expect that they will change, but just letting you know they're not yet been peer reviewed. The study was funded by the National Institute for Health and Care Research via the School for Social Care Research. We're really grateful to them for the funding and the support, but they're not accepting responsibility for anything that I'm going to say to you today. So start off to let you know just briefly what the background to the study was and the aims and objectives, but we will go through all of this quite quickly to get on to the results. So the rationale for the study, in terms of policy, we all know that housing adaptations are funded and we expect them to be continually funded, but they are always having to compete for funding with other health and social care interventions. And Care and Repair England, who many of you will know, they dubbed this the catch-22 situation, in that it was very difficult to design studies to generate evidence for them because they were already an established intervention and ongoing. But we did, and we do need the evidence in order to ensure their continued funding and sustained delivery. In terms of the academic rationale, the two reviews which are really crucial. The first is a systematic review of housing adaptations, which was done by Powell et al. In 2017. And one of the key findings from that was they said we need further studies of major adaptations using randomised control methodology and in a UK setting. And that's where we fit in as Bath Out. And prior to that, there was a review of prevention interventions for older adults, and that found that housing adaptations were one of the top 10 prevention interventions. And I always say, I think that's a real contradiction, that we say that they're really important in terms of prevention, but we can often see these lengthy waiting times for delivery. And what does that do to the preventative aspect? And the real world rationale, which I know all of you here will have many examples from your own practice. But the one that really sticks in my mind is a couple where the person who was the carer inflated a paddling pool every morning using her own breath, so that the person that she could care for could have a wash before they had their major adaptation. So taking all this into consideration then, the objectives for the Bath Out 2 study were firstly to determine the effectiveness of adaptations versus no adaptations, and we did that using routine waiting times to form a control group. So we would, in order to kind of as closely as possible say what would happen if there were no adaptations, we wanted to compare it to a group that didn't have them, and so we did this using our routine waiting times. The secondary objective was to determine the impact of longer waiting times on outcomes. And then our cost effectiveness objectives were to look at an evaluation of adaptations versus no adaptations and expedited versus routine provision of adaptations. So there's all these three components to the study. So I'm going through the background and the method very quickly. We have published our protocol, which is our methods, setting out how we would run the study and exactly how we would do the analysis. That's all published. It is freely available. You can search that and download it. There's about 9 pages there to tell you what we planned to do. A very quick run through our method before we get to the results though. This diagram here shows you what is a very simple depiction of what was quite a complicated process. So within each of our local authority housing adaptation services that took part, we approached people that met our eligibility criteria for consent to take part. The eligibility criteria were that the person was age 60 and over, and they were referred for a bathing adaptation, a major bathing adaptation only. So that was usually removal of the bath in replacement with a level access shower. So everyone that met those criteria during the time we were open was approached to take part. Those that consented had a baseline assessment completed, and you'll hear about the assessments we did in a moment. And then they waited for a pair. And the participants were paired within each site based on the same property tenure on the same site. So when we had two from the same service that was the same tenure, they were then randomised by a computer system to two groups. One group was the control group, which had the usual weight. So they had the exact service that they would have received in that local authority housing adaptation service if the study was not taken place. So the usual process and timescales. And then the other member of the pair was randomised to have a rapid adaptation, whereby we carried out the process more speedily for them. And we had some additional resource as part of the study to make available to the services to speed that process up. We then followed up every participant in the study at 4 different time points. So follow-up 1 was 4 weeks after the speeded up person had the adaptation. So this was our first evaluation of adaptation versus no adaptation. The speeded up person has had it, and the control person is still waiting. We then had another follow-up, which was planned to be 2 weeks before the control person had had their adaptation. I'll say a bit more on that in a minute. The third follow-up was 4 weeks after the control person had had their adaptation, and the fourth follow-up was 12 weeks after the control person had had their adaptation. Now, we very quickly abandoned follow-up 2 because we had real difficulties in gauging the timescale for those adaptations. So we couldn't really schedule the follow-up. So most participants did not have follow-up 2. And we also had, for each follow-up, a default timescale at 3, 9, and 12 months. So this was where the triggers were removed. So if for any reason the speeded up person didn't proceed with the adaptation, we would follow people up at 3 months. And if the control person didn't proceed, or if they hadn't had the adaptation by 9 and 12 months, then those follow-ups would be defaulted to those time points. So I've gone through all of that quite quickly to get you through to the results. The first part of the results, I'll tell you who the participants were, and then I'll tell you the effectiveness results. So we had 7 local authority sites that were open to recruitment for different times. Our overall target was 298 participants. We started out slightly higher, reduced it lower, and then went back up to 298. So in just under 2 years, you can see the numbers that we approached and that we screened, and that we ended up with 299 randomised, 3 were subsequently withdrawn. So we ended up with 146 people who had that speeded up adaptation, compared to 150 people who had the control process, which was the usual wait. We wanted to make sure that our results were as representative as possible of people who use housing adaptation services. And we know that that does include people that have impaired mental capacity. So if the person was not able to consent to take part for themselves, and they weren't able to complete their follow-ups themselves, we included alternative participants. And this was where a person on behalf of the participant would give us a short amount of factual information about them. So they didn't complete all the same measures, they completed a reduced process. It's just important to note on the results, we will explain some difference between all the participants and those where we had alternatives. So who did we have in the study then? The average age was 77, and they ranged from 60 to 94 years old. The majority of them identified as female. We had a range of ethnicities within the population, again reflecting the range of people using the services, with 60% being white British. And this is actually a much lower level of white British participants than most trials. So we're pleased with this. The most common property tenure was owner-occupied, followed by socially rented properties. And what you need to know is that the characteristics were well balanced between the two groups. This is one of the key reasons why we do randomly allocate the participants between the two groups, is to make sure that we have two groups that are similar at baseline, and they were. In terms of the adaptation fit-in, of the 296 in the trial, 209 received their adaptation in the course of the trial. That was just 58% in the control group and 84% in the intervention group. So of the 87 who did not receive it, 32 were still full participants. 10 had withdrawn from follow-up, but not from having the adaptation. 7 died prior to receiving their adaptation, and they were all in the rapid group. And 38 opted not to have it, and that was 23 in the control group and 15 in the rapid intervention group. So to summarise that participant status then at the end of the study, so we had 63% of the control group still full participants and 79% of the rapid group. And you can see the numbers there that had withdrawn. This has a lot of information on it, this slide, but it is really important in terms of the interpretation of our results. At the first follow-up 1, this was 4 weeks after the rapid person had their adaptation, we had 110, so 75% of the rapid group complete that, and 86, which was 57% of the control group that completed that. You can see follow-up 2, we only had 4 and 9 participants in the groups that completed that before we abandoned that follow-up. Follow-up 3, which was 4 weeks after the control person had their adaptation, or at 9 months, you can see we've got 94 and 73 participants returning there, and at follow-up 4, 86 and 56. So you can see that as the follow-ups progressed, we had fewer participants that completed them, and you can see that there is this difference between more participants completing their follow-ups in the rapid group compared to the control group. So we do need to bear this in mind when we look at the results. So I'm going to tell you the effectiveness results now. So our primary outcome, this was the one that we considered the most important and the one that the study was statistically powered on, was what's called the physical component summary of a measure called the short form 36. And this measures physical well-being, and it includes a physical functioning component with a bathing question. So we did quite a lot of work beforehand, including with people with lived experiences, to determine which measure to use as our primary, and this was the one that was agreed was most important. We collected this at baseline, so before the participants were randomised, and at each follow-up time point. And our primary time point was at follow-up 1. So this allows a comparison 4 weeks after the adaptation for the intervention group with no adaptation for the control group. So the rapid group have got it and the control group haven't. We had 201 participants that were included in this analysis. And the adjusted mean difference between the groups at follow-up 1 was 2.5 points higher. Higher score is better. So what this means is that there was a statistically significant difference between the two groups. So the participants who had their adaptation had on average a physical component summary score that is 2.5 points higher than those in the control group. So they had a better level of physical well-being and physical ability. So we've got the 95% confidence interval there that you can see after the 2.5 points. And that's how confident we are of the true difference in the population based on our study. And you can see that our confidence interval is from 0.8 to 4.2 points, which is a positive interval. So we are confident that there is a true difference in the population on physical well-being based on our study. So this is a really good result. So this chart here shows you the scores from the model at baseline, follow-up 1, follow-up 3, and follow-up 4. And you can see that at baseline, the groups were similar, which is what we hope. You can see that at follow-up 1, when our rapid group has the adaptation and the control group still waiting, there's this difference that's opened up, which I showed you on the previous slide. But you can see by follow-ups 3 and follow-ups 4, that difference appears to disperse. The groups go back together again. There's quite a bit to remember about what's happening at follow-ups 3 and 4. So some participants in the control group have started to have their adaptation by this point, so they might be improving when they would otherwise be declining. Some of the work that we've done around our outcomes has indicated that it was perhaps the people with the worst quality of life at baseline that were then the ones that dropped out of the study, that didn't return their follow-ups, which would also explain why the control group has maintained. So we aren't 100% sure about the effect at follow-ups 3 and follow-ups 4. So I've got some secondary outcomes to explain to you now. And the first of these is the mental component summary of the short form 36. And this is sort of sister measure to the physical component summary. So this is a measure of participants' mental well-being. And this was also collected at baseline and at each follow-up. And the results on this is an adjusted mean difference for the first follow-up of 3.7 points. And again, higher score is better. So our rapid group, the group that had the adaptation compared to the control group, had a better mental well-being of about 4 points. And again, our 95% confidence interval there is from 0.9 to 6.5. So we're confident that there is a positive difference in mental well-being for people who have had the adaptation compared to those who are still waiting. And this chart here shows the result for the mental component summary at baseline, follow-up 1, 3, and 4. And this is on the same scale as the slide, the chart that you saw for the physical component summary. So you can see there's actually this bigger difference that opens up in terms of mental well-being between the groups. And the difference seems to be maintained for mental well-being, it doesn't fall away like it did with physical well-being. So this is also an important finding. We are confident that the adaptations lead to an improvement in mental well-being and that is maintained. So we had quite a few secondary outcomes as well. We had falls, the ASCOT, which is a measure of social care related quality of life. We had the short falls efficacy scale, which is a measure of fear of falling. We looked at independence in bathing and ease of bathing. So I'll explain those results to you in turn. So for falls, we've got the IRR, which is an incident rate ratio, and a rate ratio of 1 would mean an equal rate of falls between people in the rapid group and people in the usual weight group. So because that's less than 1, 0.4, that's suggesting that there are 0.4 falls for every 1 fall in the control group. So people in the rapid group were 60% less likely to fall or reported a fall at follow-up 1 compared to the people in the control group. So again, the adaptations appeared to lead to a reduction in falls. In terms of social care related quality of life, that's the ASCOT there. That's adjusted mean difference of 0.09. So that's a 9-point difference in the ASCOT, which is an important difference. And the confidence interval is between 3 and 14 points. So again, statistically significant finding. We are confident that the adaptations led to an improvement in social care related quality of life. For the shortfalls efficacy scale, you've got -2.6, so that's a reduction. A reduction in fear of falling is a positive. So, and again, that's a statistically significant and positive finding. We are confident that the adaptations led to a reduction in fear of falling. The Bartel index was the bathing question. That's an OR, that's the odds ratio, an odds ratio of 12. We are saying that the participants who'd had the adaptation were 12 times more likely to be bathing independently than participants in the control group. And perceived ease of bathing was a 100-point scale, with 100 being no problems at all and 0 being unable to bathe. And we've got a 44-point difference in ease of bathing after the adaptation. So all of those results are positive and statistically significant. So in summary, the participants who had received the bathing adaptation reported better physical and mental ability. They had experienced less falls, they had lower fear of falling, and felt like they had more independence when undertaking daily tasks, and they found bathing easier 4 weeks after having the adaptation than those who had not received it. So that's an excellent set of results. So I'm going to hand you over to my colleagues now, who are health economists, and they're going to talk you through the cost effectiveness methods and then the cost effectiveness findings. I think we're starting with Joe.
Hi there. Yeah, so I think one of the things that's really important is to understand what cost effectiveness analysis does and what it doesn't do. So if we think about resources being scarce, so the social care budget is not infinite, as we know. What we want to try and do is find out which interventions provide the maximum benefit for the population that we're dealing with. And that is called efficiency. You can only talk about efficiency if we are comparing, as this slide suggests, at least 2 interventions in terms of costs and benefits. So you've got intervention A, costs and benefits of A, and intervention B, which is costs and obviously effects of B. Now, in our case, this was the costs of adaptation versus no adaptation, A versus B, and also the cost effectiveness of expedited waiting times versus usual wait. Now, from those costs and benefits for A and B, what we do is we estimate what's called an incremental cost effectiveness ratio. And this shows that between 2 alternatives, what is the difference in costs and what are the different divided by what are the difference in effects. And this can give us, for example, an additional cost per unit of effect. So can we go to the next slide, please? So what we're looking at here is the new adaptation is expedited waiting lists. The comparator was usual wait, but we also looked at a new intervention being adaptation, comparator being no adaptation. We measure the costs, and in this case, we use a health-related quality of life measure known as the QALY. The QALY is a composite score of length of life following treatment in a quality adjusted state. and the results are expressed as an incremental cost effectiveness ratio. Now, just to say at this point, we accept that the health-related quality of life is perhaps not the best outcome measure to use. We did this because of the National Institute for Health and Care Excellence reference case, that decisions are made to invest in interventions in the health and social care space if we get a cost per QALY that is somewhere around or less than £25,000 per quality adjusted life year gained. So whilst we do acknowledge that this is perhaps not the best outcome indicator, we needed to present the cost effectiveness of social care on an equal playing field as healthcare interventions, if that makes sense, so we could show just how important social care interventions are relative to healthcare interventions. So that was the rationale for that. Next slide, please. So this slide is quite important because for a cost effectiveness ratio, as health economists, we're not, as I've said, we're not into the idea of minimising costs. It's the cost difference, which on this, between two interventions, which on this diagram is the vertical. So you can get an intervention that's more costly or less costly than another. And you can get along the horizontal, intervention A may be more effective than B, and it also might be less effective. Now, what this means, this is quite important for us, because if a new intervention is more effective and less costly, which is sort of the bottom right-hand quadrant, we say that's dominant and we'll go ahead. It doesn't matter what the cost per QALY is. It's cheaper and it works better. It's a no-brainer. In the top left-hand quadrant, if an intervention is more costly and less effective, again, that's dominant. It's a no-brainer. You wouldn't invest. The grey areas, if you like, the north, is that northeast? Yeah, the northeast and the southwest quadrants, particularly the top right-hand side there, usually we see in sort of health technology assessments, new interventions, they tend to be both more costly and more effective. And it's this quadrant here where sort of health technology is being assessed. We have this ratio where NICE will pay up to £25,000 per quality adjusted life year gained for an intervention. And that's sort of where that kind of grey area sits. And this is why, just in case the social care at Bathout ended up in this quadrant, we use the QALY to work out what was the cost per quality adjusted life year gained, should we have needed that. Next slide, please. So we looked at the unit costs were delivered or obtained. So what we do to cost something, obviously, we multiply the resource used by a unit cost. All the unit costs are obtained from suitable and recognised sources. So things like the NHS reference costs, unit costs from health and social care. The costs that we costed, it included the cost of the adaptation plus the expediation. But also, most importantly for us, I guess, and where the findings are in terms of cost effectiveness, is that we looked at subsequent resource use in primary, secondary and personal social care settings. So if somebody has the adaptation, what sort of, like, I suppose, what is the subsequent strain on resources from the NHS and the strain on the resources for social care services, and compared that if they hadn't had the adaptation, and similarly for expediated versus non-expediation. Next slide, please. Final slide from me. So in terms of the health-related quality of life, we used the standard measurement tool that the National Institute advises in the reference case, which is the EQ5D. It's a 5-dimensional tool. It's a generic preference-based tool. So you get people to fill out on a 5-point scale where their mobility is, ranging from some problems to no problems at all. And in addition, self-care, usual activities, pain and discomfort, and anxiety and depression. And we got people to collect that baseline and each of the follow-up points. And just to explain how it works very briefly, if you got a 1, 1, 1, 1, 1 across all those 5 dimensions, that would be denoted as perfect health. You're in 100% health. If you got a 1, 2, 3, 1, 1 or whatever it was, you might be something like 0.6%, or in other words, 60% of full health. And actually, if you got a 5, 5, 5, 5, 5, this tool allows for states worse than death. So if I said to you, for the rest of your life, you're going to be in agony, you can't do anything yourself, there's no usual activities, you're excruciating pain, and you're severely depressed, that has been measured by populations using this tool. So populations have ranked them to state that could be, for example, feasibly a state worse than death. So now having explained what we've done in terms of cost per qualies, I'll hand over to Andrew, who is going to show you the results.
Oh, thank you for that. Can we go to the next slide, please? Oh, great. So to begin with, I thought it would be quite good to look at the costs. So we have a table of costs for the intervention group and control group at each follow-up. So I should say for the analysis, as Philip said earlier, follow-up 2 sort of was stopped partway through the trial because there were such few people filling it out, and there were some issues around that. So we don't look at follow-up 2 here. We've just dropped those few that got completed. If we look at baseline, so that sort of top row there, in the intervention group, the costs for the sort of the 30 days before they came into the study was about £475, which is a little bit lower than the cost for the control group, which averaged about £584. So the groups were fairly similar on average. By follow-up 1, this occurred 4 weeks after the intervention group got their adaptation. The control group still don't have their adaptation. We can see that reflected in the costs. Across those 4 weeks, the intervention group have an average cost of £1,457 compared to £530 in the control group. And what we can see is in the control group, they haven't had any intervention yet. They're still waiting. There's been very little change to their costs, whilst for the intervention group, their costs have gotten quite a lot larger, but that is mainly down to the adaptation costs. If you took the adaptation costs out, then it would be about £400 still. So yeah, sorry, on to the next bit there. Yeah, so where we see a difference starting to open up is in the later follow-ups at follow-up 3 and 4. At this point, the cost of the adaptation has been accrued by the intervention group, so that's not going to come back in. But for the control group, some participants are starting to get their adaptation, and some are still on the waiting list. And what we see is a follow-up 3 there. Costs have gotten quite large in the control group compared to the intervention groups. That's £1,300 compared to £2,100. And that continues further into follow-up 4, where the intervention group cost £1,100 on average compared to £2,600 to the control group. A lot of the cost differences that are opening up here, we can say it's not on the slide, but I can tell you it's driven by those in the control group who get their adaptations on the usual waiting list, or who are still waiting for their adaptations, have higher secondary care costs and higher sort of paid care costs. And that's where these cost differences are coming into, are opening up from. Yeah, the next slide, please. So I'm not going to go through the summary data for the quality of life. What we're going to do is we're going to jump straight into the statistical analysis, the cost effectiveness results. There'll be a series of results here, but what we're going to look at first is expedient adaptation versus usual wait. This is where we compared everyone in the intervention arm who had their expedient adaptation, so that's everyone there, and with everyone in the control arm, and that's including those in the control arm who did and did not receive the adaptation. We'll look at that with everyone's data, so that's the participants and the alternate participants, and then we'll look at what the impact of removing the alternate participants has on results. Then what we'll do is we'll look at adaptation versus no adaptation. So this is where we compared the intervention arm with the control arm, but only the people in the control arm who did not receive the adaptation during the trial. And again, we'll present that for those all participants and with those excluding the APs. Next slide, please. So to begin with, there's a lot of information on this slide, but if you look at the diagram on the left, that is the 4 quadrants that Joe explained earlier. So we're looking at difference in cost on the vertical, difference in quality on the horizontal. There's that red dot that's right in the middle of those blue dots. That red dot is the regression result. What we found is that using all of the data, the intervention group expedited adaptation cost £565 less across the course of the trial compared to the control group on the usual weight group. What we can also know, have identified, is that there's a quality gain of 0.052, which, although that might seem like a small number, is quite a big gain, especially given this is an elderly population with a lot of conditions, issues, and problems. All those blue dots are versions of the model we run. So what we do is we want to capture uncertainty around our results. So we run the model 1,000 times using what we call bootstrapping, where we sample from the data and run the model using that sample of data and sort of see what that result shows as well. What we can do is we can see all of those dots tend to be sort of where quality difference is positive, which is saying that, every time we've run this model 1,000 times, and in all 1,000 times in the model, there was always a quality of life gain estimated. There's a little bit more uncertainty around cost differences. As you can see, quite a lot of the dots are under that 0 line, which is saying the intervention sort of costs less, but there are some dots above saying it might cost more. And that's reflected in the confidence intervals on the table, where the cost difference is somewhere between minus £2,000 up to £1,300 more expensive. And we can see with the quality difference, we have a statistically significant quality gain of somewhere between 0.026 to 0.078. In terms of the ISA, what we can say is that this intervention is dominant. That red dot is in the southeast quadrant. In terms of willingness to pay, as Joe mentioned earlier, we can use what we've used as a £20,000 per quality threshold. And what we've done, and that's where that dashed line going up through the diagram is, that's the sort of £20,000 per quality sort of willingness to pay threshold line. What we can do is we can count up every blue dot underneath that line, and each one of those dots represents a run of the model in which expedited weight was cost effective compared to usual weight. And what we do is we say that 94.8% of the time our model was saying it's cost effective. Or another way to think about that is we ran this model 1,000 times, and then 948 of those times expedited weight was cost effective, which is a really strong result. Some of the strongest cost effectiveness results I've seen in my career so far. Next slide, please. Then what we did was we ran a version of the model without the alternative participants. What we can see is all of those dots shift up slightly. There is still a significant quality difference in improvement, expedited weight. It's slightly higher, but there's very, very little change there. However, removing the alternative participants is increased the cost a bit, and the sort of cost difference is £354. In terms of that confidence interval, that uncertainty, it's somewhere between minus £1,000 to £1,800 more expensive. Again, in terms of the cost per quality, if you look at that, if you take 354 divided by 0.058, you'll get £6,103 per quality, which, as you know, is under our £20,000 per quality threshold. And similarly, if we count up all those blue dots there, 82% of the time, this would be cost effective still, or expedited weight. Expedited intervention. In other words, if 1,000 times of running this model, 820 of the times it was saying that the intervention was cost effective. Next slide, please. Just to go with this, one of the things we need to be aware of with what we've just seen is, as we said, there are a lot of people in the usual weight group who didn't get their intervention during the trial. Even though the trial will finish, they'll still be on the waiting list and will get it at some point. But we need to recognise that they haven't had the cost of the adaptation come into their kind of costs, whilst everybody in the intervention group who got their adaptation early have had that cost. So here, what we've done is we've ran versions of the models you've just seen, but we removed the cost of the adaptation completely. So this is only looking at cost changes in terms of primary care, secondary care, and social care, sort of going forward, from the point that they've joined into the study. And what we see is that the quality difference is unchanged because we've not done anything around that. The cost difference, though, has obviously dropped quite a bit. So we're now, I think the first model had a minus £500 estimate. Now we're at minus £1,100, or in other words, expedited adaptation is £1,100 cheaper when you only look at social primary care, secondary, and social care compared to sort of the usual weight. And similarly, on the model we just saw, where we had that positive sort of £300 cost, it was slightly more expensive. When you remove the adaptation costs, it actually becomes cheaper. So it's just something to be aware of. The adaptation costs do have quite a big influence on the results. Next slide, please. Thank you. So then what we've looked at is, so that was looking at expedited weight versus usual weight. What we've also looked at here is adaptation versus no adaptation. So here we're using the intervention group still, so everyone in the intervention group, but we're only using the control group. It's the control group who don't have the adaptation. And this is important because what I'll say is these results, the cost of the adaptation is included for the adaptation group, obviously, but we don't have a cost of adaptation at all for the no adaptation because they haven't got it. So just keep that in mind with these results. But even with that, we can see that adaptation costs £1,600 less than no adaptation. And that's the confidence interval suggesting that's somewhere between minus £3,500 and £1,200. Minus £3,500 to £1,200, but more expensive. Again, we can see adaptation is given a quality gain, and it's significant. It's between 0.032 to 0.90. Our red dot there is in the southeast quadrant, so the intervention is dominant. And looking from a willingness to pay perspective, we count up all those blue dots from our bootstrapped analysis. 97.8% of the time, the model is suggesting that adaptation is cost effective compared to no adaptation. In other words, out of 1,000 times you run the model, 978 times, this is going to suggest it's cost effective. Next slide, please. Now, as we saw earlier, if you exclude the alternative participants, the costs sort of shift upwards. See that in terms of those dots. Quality difference is still there. It's a little bit more improved, 0.071, but the cost difference now is £81 more expensive, although it is somewhere between minus £1,300 to £2,200. But even with that sort of willingness to pay, it's £1,140 per quali, the non-parametric ISA there. It actually sort of 86% of the time the model is suggesting that it's still cost effective. And again, this kind of echoes back to what Joe said. We're not just about minimizing costs. We're not just focusing on costs. What we're doing is we're balancing cost differences and quality differences together to try and work out which is the most cost effective result. Next slide, please. So one of the ongoing bits of work, what we're doing with this is to try to translate the results of this trial, the cost effectiveness analysis, and to develop a return on investment toolkit. Next bit, please. And again, thanks. the idea is going to be to help sort of decision makers, so many people on this call, in terms of looking at their local area, inputting values in these results, suggesting what might be appropriate in terms of what to fund, what not to fund, and so on. But this is a bit of ongoing work, which hopefully we will be able to share down the line. Next slide, please. And I'm going to hand this back over to Philip, who's going to give us a bit of a summary and conclusions. Thank you.
Thanks, Andrew and Joe. So hi, everyone, again. We've hit you with lots of stats and economics. So I'm going to give you the high-level summary and conclusion now. So just to summarize, bathing adaptations we can say that they lead to an improvement in a range of outcomes for older adults 4 weeks after they have been installed when compared to a group of adults who don't have them. All the outcomes in the study were in favour of the intervention group and were statistically significant at 4 weeks after installation. The longer-term outcomes appear mixed, and the effect on physical function, which was the primary outcome, reduced over time, whereas some of the secondaries, the effect seemed to be maintained. The bathing adaptations led to a statistically significant increase in quality-adjusted life years. Resource use was higher in the control group, so people who waited and people who didn't have the adaptation, particularly in relation to the use of secondary care and social care costs. And expedited adaptations were associated with less resource use than adaptations provided via usual wait, with savings particularly on NHS inpatient care and on social care. So discussion and future then, I do just need to remind you of the attrition rate, which is the loss to follow-up in the study. So that does limit our findings to some extent. We obviously don't know what happened to the people who dropped out and were not followed up in the study. We haven't extensively researched the costs or factors associated with the implementation of speeding up the adaptations process outside of the trial. So we had our local authority sites that speeded up the process for the participants in the study, but that was generally for them 1 or 2 at most per month over a relatively short period of time. That's obviously a different undertaking to speeding up the whole service. But for the first time, we have quantifiable results to inform decision making in the area of housing adaptations. And we'd like to hear from all of you, either on the call now or via email afterwards, to help us think about the implications for policy and practice. So just before I finish, and hopefully we have got some time for questions, I do just want to thank everybody. I feel like I'm turning it into the Oscars when I do this, but there's been a huge research team that have worked on the study, and we couldn't have done it without all of them. We had a trial steering committee that kept us going at a time when it looked like we might not. We've had a public advisory group that have sat alongside us, giving us their lived experiences throughout. I'd like, again, to thank the funder for the funding, and we had some additional funding contribution from AKW. I do particularly want to thank the local authority sites. Hopefully some of you are on this call, but the sites that took part, we started the study when COVID was hitting. They had all sorts going on. So the ones that kind of stepped up and ran this study, all the sector really needs to thank them. And finally, all of the participants and the people who supported their participation. So thank you for listening, and hopefully we can answer some questions.
Great, thank you, Phil. And we bring Andrew and Joe back to the stage and move the slides. So we've got a number of questions that have been coming through. I know, Joe, you've been answering some of them as we've gone. So let's start off with this one then from Jane. Was it just a kind of level access share or share adaptations that you considered rather than any other bathing adaptations as part of the project?
So it was any bathing adaptation. So it would have been that would have depended on the housing adaptation service. If it was a major adaptation that was referred to them for bathing only, then they would have come into the study. But my understanding is that essentially, in almost all cases, meant level access shower.
Great, thank you. So Caroline was asking about, I think you said at the start that all the applicants, I can't remember the minimum age, is relatively old, I think. So what do you think are the kind of challenges or differences potentially for children and families?
Yeah, so I mean, the question can kind of be replicated. It certainly could be part of our rationale, which I didn't explain at the start of the study. There's quite strong epidemiological evidence that for older adults in the trajectory of disability, bathing, particularly within the household, tends to be the first thing that older adults struggle with. So part of the rationale for this was, if we get in there earlier with our intervention, be it in this case the adaptation, do we manage to sort of stave off and prevent some of that further deterioration? We haven't perhaps seen it in terms of physical functioning, but we certainly do look like we've seen it in terms of what resources they've used. So I think the rationale is quite different for bath out. I think it's important that the rationale for other areas be, other client groups be developed, but there's no reason why you couldn't use this approach for children and families.
Great. So Claire's question was around costs of improved peace of mind. Was that factored into the qualities in some way?
Ooh, that's a good question.
Sorry, I'm just trying to find the question. Sorry, what was exactly the question?
Was some level of capture for the costs of improved peace of mind?
I think that would be captured as not directly, but as far as possible by the anxiety and depression subscale in the EQ5D questionnaire. That would be reflected in that. I accept it's not, sort of carer burden or anything like that, or but yes, that's where we would expect that to be quantified.
Okay.
And potentially also in the mental well-being component, which is the one that the graph that I showed you about, it looked like that was maintained. So there would be a few questions within that would have captured kind of broadly.
James is asking about, I suppose, kind of the split between savings to social care and NHS. How do they kind of figure in terms of the economics of the
So we didn't present the sort of broken down graph, although we do have a table with the sort of breakdown by primary care, secondary care, and social care, because what might be a bit too much information for one slide. There's very little sort of cost on average, very little cost happening in primary care. From the data we collected, it was mostly secondary and social care. What we could see is that in the control group, as the trial went on, so that those follow-up 3 and 4, they were using a lot more paid care. So having paid carers come in, a lot more sessions of paid care in longer sessions compared to the intervention group. And similarly, they were going to hospital more often. So
we could share that I don't know, there must be some way that people with questions can email us. I don't want to preempt that, but we could share that information to give you a clearer idea of the proportions. Obviously, secondary care admissions are the most, in a single item, they're the most expensive thing. Relative to sort of other adaptations around bathing, but it was the other adaptations in the formal carer costs that actually drove the social care.
Okay, so I think that links to kind of Jenny's question on care hours saved. So it sounds like there's some very positive figures in terms of care hours saved.
Yeah, one thing to say as well, we're talking here about sort of paid care. We did try to collect information on it in informal care, so unpaid care, but it was quite difficult to the way that kind of the information came back. It's been quite difficult to interpret and to assign sort of costs to that. So that is something that hopefully we might be able to have another look at, but it's something just to be aware of. This is about paid care, not.
Okay.
Yeah, and I think that it's fair to say that we would anticipate that obviously informal care would be hugely higher, and it should actually be included. So in actual fact, it would, sort of the cost differences between them would be even greater for the intervention versus control. But we know it's notoriously difficult to develop questionnaires that people can understand and report time spent with their loved one. So that is a challenge for most economic evaluations, but yes, it would have vastly increased the dominance of the intervention versus control.
And just very, very briefly on the sort of carer costs as well in the information, we've sort of assigned costs to the number of care sessions, the length of care sessions. What we don't have the information on necessarily is what's going on during those sessions. So it may be that once the adaptations go in, there is still care in place, because there may be delays on that changing, but also what is actually going on. Previously, the care might have been about getting people, in and out of a bath, helping them wash and so on. That might actually, because they can now do that more easily themselves, it might free up the care to sort of meet other needs. So that's something to be aware of, and that might be reflected somewhat through the changes in quality of life, but that is kind of going a little bit down the road.
Yeah, I think there's quite a lot of potential around support for informal carers, isn't there? I'm kind of one of the agendas I've heard kind of over the last year or so is supporting them back into work, and obviously if the person they're caring for is more independent, then there is kind of more potential for them to return to the workforce as well.
It's hugely important. I mean, without informal carers, we're just about to embark on some further research, but we know that, informal carers are in a sense, the reason why the social care system hasn't crumbled altogether with the budget allocations. And if we can't rely on the informal carers, then we would be in quite a lot of considerable trouble, I think. And we would normally cost that care time at least using a minimum wage estimate. But as I've said, the recording of it is very difficult. That researchers such as myself need to be turning our attention to.
Anne was just asking in terms of expedited, what was the difference in waiting time between the two groups?
So, well, expedited was defined as in we began the process as soon as practicable after they'd been randomised. So we removed whatever the default waiting period was at the site. The control group did actually vary quite a bit in their waiting times, because some of them hadn't had it by 12 months. All of them were, well, I think I'm right, Andrew, none of them had it by 9 months, is that? Or maybe 2 of them did.
I think very, very few, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So what's next? So I've heard about the toolkit. That sounds very exciting. Is that available soon? When and kind of
yes,
what does that look like as a thing?
Yes, it will be. She said confidently. We're just in the process of populating it, and what the tool hopefully will be, it will have some parameters that local authorities can populate themselves in it, like population or numbers of people using OT or sort of adaptation services, and then it will automatically, we hope, allow local authorities to then look at the potential cost savings on those sort of localized demographics.
Okay, so kind of the benefits of doing adaptations quicker, or kind of the benefit of just kind of doing adaptations.
Well, we can do both. We'll do one for no adaptations, but also, I mean, the message is quite clear that timely care in people's homes saves money. I mean, it's a no-brainer in a sense.
Yeah, I mean, but sometimes no-brainers take the most effort, don't they?
Well, yeah, I mean, and that's why we've had to do the trial to prove once and for all that this is the evidence base. So I suppose there's an argument that it should be taken more seriously.
Absolutely. So, so apart from kind of toolkit and bits and pieces, where are you going next as a team? Have you got other projects, or is there kind of more on the back of this one that you're looking to take forward?
Well, we can't say for definite yet, but we are planning a program of work to look at the entire pathway. So obviously we've looked at the major adaptations process, which we know is kind of a link in the chain, but we didn't look extensively at the occupational therapy part of that, the assessment part, and many people kind of come into major adaptations having had trial with equipment and minor adaptations. So we're planning a program of work, the whole pathway from kind of when the person first makes contact with the service to the whatever final outcome that is. We want to do some more work around the implementation of the speeded up process, because as we said, it's one thing to speed up for a handful of referrals, it's another thing to speed up the whole process. So we're going to be looking at that. And the questions about carers, our program will also have a defined piece of work around carers as well. So yeah, lots more to come the next 10 years.
It's good, yes, good to hear after 10 years that you still got kind of enthusiasm to kind of carry it on and develop more evidence in this area. Quite a nice question from Tracy, I think, to kind of round off the afternoon. What surprised you the most? Perhaps come to each of you in turn, but what surprised you most from the outcomes of the research? So Philip, do you want to go first on that one?
I mean, I think for me, it is the consistency across all of those measures. I've worked on a number of other rehab trials, and I've seen a lot of trials which have had not a neutral outcome, or where they haven't shown effect, whereas what we've shown here is an effect consistently and across all of those outcomes. So I definitely felt that we would see an effect, but the fact that we've seen it in every outcome, I think, it's just have been a real pleasant surprise.
Yeah. I mean, I've seen other studies that kind of show almost a negative effect across lots of indicators. So yeah, it's really good to see positive ones. Andrew, what was the surprise for you?
Well, it's not so much the outcomes of the research, but getting involved in this project, it was a bit sort of eye-opening how little evidence there already was in the area. I thought that was a bit concerning in a way, sort of for thinking back, about this. So it's been really good to have some strong evidence that can sort of start to build that base a bit more.
Yes, yeah, and it's already kind of fed into government as well. So in terms of future thinking, I think it's already being quite influential in terms of spending reviews and the like. And Joe, what surprised you the most?
Just the in health economics, we very rarely see such dominant results. So cost saving and additional benefits to clients or users of service, and in particular the certainty of the results in terms of the 90% certainty we are now. That means a lot in terms of NICE land, the National Institute of Clinical Excellence. And for me personally, it's something that like Philip and I are working together, but working in the social care space is certainly my priority going forward.
Excellent. Well, thank you all for joining us this afternoon and sharing the results again. I think they've very. I think they can be very, very influential. We certainly love to invite you back to kind of go through the toolkit when that's available, so that people can start to use the results locally and kind of drive forward changes.
Yeah, we will provide a toolkit guidance, but we're also quite happy to come back on and take people through how to use it.
Excellent, that'd be fantastic. So thank you all for joining us this afternoon. I'm sure you'll see in the chat there's lots of comments saying that they found it really useful and interesting. So yeah, I'm sure it's something we'll be returning to probably several times in the future, I think, as kind of the new research develops. So thank you all.
Thank you.
Foundations Live.
Right. I hope you've all found that really interesting. Let me find. Let's get rid of that question. Where's it gone? It's going so well as well. It's going so well. There we go. Right. Just before we break for the afternoon, I've got one other little recording from a researcher at Bath University who is developing a documentary around home adaptations, and he's looking for your help and assistance.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Faye, and I'm a researcher at the University of Bath, and I look at links between housing and various different health outcomes. Sorry, I can't be there in person today. Unfortunately, I have a clash, but thank you for Paul for letting me come on here and talk to everyone about what we're working on and what we want some help with, really, and some collaborations. So what we're working on is a documentary project at the University of Bath, looking at the links between housing and health. So this documentary will be split into 3 different parts. The first part will be looking at the evidence of links between housing and health. The middle part will be focused on lived experiences, so talking to people about their stories, and the latter part will be focused on interviewing key organisations and individuals, change makers involved in this space, who we really want to hear about the innovation in the projects that they're working on and the impacts that they're having. So that's a brief overview, I guess, of the story that we're trying to tell, and we're looking for collaborators in this space, and we're trying to reach as many different people as possible. So we're interested in anyone in either of those 3 different aspects, but something that we're particularly interested in getting some collaboration on is lived experiences. So if that's something that you might be able to help us out on, then please do contact me. I'm sure Paul has my email, so if anyone here is interested, then please do send me an email, and we can set up a call, talk about it in a bit more detail, and yeah, that's everything that I wanted to share with you today. Like I said, I'm sorry I can't be there at the webinar. I hope it was good fun, and I hope you have a good rest of your day. Thank you.
So that was Faye there from University of Bath, and if you'd be interested in helping with the documentary project, particularly finding people with lived experience to join that, then the Faye's email is in the comments in the chat for you to get in touch. So I think that pretty much brings us to a close for today. So thank you to Philip, Joe and Andrew for joining us and taking us so expertly through the Bath Out figures, and we'll definitely get them back as soon as the toolkit is out, so that you can see how that works and use it in your local area. Coming up, as I mentioned, we do have roadshows returning at the end of this month. In fact, I was just writing the presentation before we started today, and I'm going to go back and finish it in a minute. So we've got lots of content on the roadshows. It'd be good to see you on those. We'll leave this Foundations Live up on the website for a few days in case you want to revisit it, or if you want to pass the link on to any colleagues. It's also on LinkedIn, Facebook and YouTube if you want to revisit it and go through any figures again. And next Foundations Live, we've got a special looking at some charitable services that operate in the area. So there's one particularly where there's a group that go around supporting people with weeding their garden, and another charity that provides access to pre-used furniture, which you might find useful for your clients. And there's I think kind of a couple of extra speakers we're just confirming at the moment. And then the next Foundations Live after that, we're going to be looking at home automations or smart homes. We've got a new report out that looks at the kind of capability and the options around companion person services, delivering things like Google Homes and Alexas and Ring doorbells, and how well they can fit them and maintain them and support people to use them. And we've also got a new guide on more extensive home automations. So I suppose kind of stair lifts are a kind of home automation, but things like window openers, door openers, electric beds, all sorts of things that can help to automate the home that could potentially be part of DFG projects. So that will be coming up in, I think that will be in April. In terms of feedback, so it's good to hear what you've thought of Foundations Live, and if you want to get your CPD certificate as well, you'll get an email from us with this link on. But if you want to go to foundations.uk.com/webinar-feedback, you can do that pretty much anytime you want to. So thank you for all joining us today. I think that's probably the biggest Foundations Live audience we've had for a little while. And I think over on Radio 4, I think it's Radio 4, it was Radio 2, Jeremy Vine was talking about DFGs. There's a new investigation being published by the BBC today. And I think if you've missed some of that, maybe have a listen on iPlayer. But you can catch up on demand on Foundations Live as well. But I think you probably made the best decision to come and listen to this. But thank you all for joining, and hope to see you again next month.